Welcome, happy Sabbath. It's been a long time since I've been here. I think I speak maybe once a year. That's probably how much I can tolerate, I guess. I don't know. Once a year is good. Whenever Pastor asks me to speak, I always have a chance to sort of reflect on my life in ways that I don't think that I would normally. Just to think about how God is speaking to me, what is the message that he is putting into my mind. And I can only speak about those things that I experience, right? That's the things that I can testify to. And the thing that I'm going to testify to you is something that has been just growing inside of me. And I wasn't exactly able to articulate those things until maybe a couple weeks ago. And I started to really think, this is it. And it took a turn, a really deeply personal turn into myself and how I thought, and it became very uncomfortable in a certain sense. So hopefully that's okay for you. And this testimony here that I give you is maybe it's my individual experience and circumstance, so it might not apply directly. And so I really want to ask God to be here in this space, that he speak to you and bring to mind the individual circumstances that you're going through and the people that you're thinking about and the relationships that are around you. So with that, let's pray. Dear Lord, I want to thank you for this message. It is short, it is simple, and I just pray, Father, that you speak through me, that you speak into the individual circumstances, that you speak to people here, Lord, and their place, and you bring to mind those things in our life that we need to change and that we need to shift. I pray, Father, that you hide me behind your veil and speak. I pray these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. Well, like I was saying a couple weeks ago, maybe I get the next slide here. There was our fearless children's leader, Sarah Pack. She took most of the children who were interested into going to see a movie called The Wild Robot. This was no small feat. It was sort of chaotic for the first couple minutes, but we all kind of crammed into 3 rows. And as I began to see this movie, I was like, wow, there's a lot of things here that's going on. And the first thing that I noticed that the movie itself, just to give you just a little bit about the movie, there's a robot that gets marooned on an island. And when this robot gets marooned on this island, he encounters all of these animals. And he tries to interact with these animals, but the animals are very hostile toward him. They attack him. They try to take parts from him. And not only does he see that, he sees that other animals try to kill the other animals. And it's really about the fastest and the strongest animal that really survives. And it creates a really Darwinian picture of nature, of the strongest and the fastest, they survive. And the robot comes into this space, and he's trying to understand these animals. And these animals are trying to destroy him, so he decides he's going to camouflage himself. He's going to camouflage himself and try to understand the animal ways, right? And so as he does so, he begins to understand their language. He eventually befriends a fox. All the animals hate this sly fox. This fox is trying to steal food from everybody else. And he asks the question, like, why do you do these things? Like, why do you do these things? And the fox, and I'm paraphrasing here, the fox says, this is the way of the island. This is what you do to survive. You have to eat and kill. You have to steal. You have to do these things. It is a right of self-preservation. And as he is saying these things, the robot says, and this is the statement that I took pause in. It says, this is your programming. This is your programming. And I was like, oh gosh, whoa, that was a deep statement there. And then that statement kept running in my head so much about programming. This is your programming. This is your nature. This is your instinctual drive. This is how you act. And I couldn't get that out of my head about that. Eventually, though, the robot doesn't adapt to the programming of the island. And he does something different. I encourage you to go watch the movie. Next slide, please. Programming has been on my mind because this is what I do on almost a daily basis. I look at these pictures. This is a real picture of a real neuron done by Google, the researchers at Google and some neuroscience laboratories, of a single neuron and all of the thousands of connections that are connected to that single neuron. And when I think about this complexity, I'm just like, oh man, I don't know how to fathom. I don't know how to study this brain that we have that is filled with 1 billion of these neurons connected in more than 1 billion ways. There's tens of thousands of connections. On the left-hand side there, you see the axons that are synapsing with that particular neuron, and all the green, and then all that has been stripped away to show you that all the green dots are the places where those connections can happen. And these connections, you have to understand, are not static. They're dynamic. They change with experience. And when I think about that, when I think about the billions of neurons that are in your head, we are made to be programmed to a certain degree. Our programming, the architecture is such that when we experience things, when information comes to us, this dynamic sort of connections start to form. And it starts to form when we are young, and it continues on. And this is really troubling to a certain extent because there's no point, and I can safely say this, there's no point in history as it is now where we have the amount of information, the speed of information that can come at an individual so fast and across the world in so many ways and so much content. And it's always been like, yes, when I know that when I click on something, I know that, there's an algorithm somewhere where that click then influences another type of content that clicks again, that continue to raise engagement. I think some of you at least are aware of how this engagement works. There was a researcher, if I can get the next slide, that really delved into this topic of search engine manipulation. He called it the SEME effect. And what he did, which was very, very interesting, is that he took all these individual people and he did a double-blind study where he was looking at how information is particularly curated for that individual and how the curation of that search engine really impacts the perception of candidates. Not only the perception of candidates, it increases. So if you put a bunch of positive content on those search engines that you search for, and if you search for a particular candidate, for example, they'll start curating a very specific set of information to that individual that will then increase the perception by as much as 30 to 60%. Eventually, if you ask these individuals how they would vote, it impacts their behavior. And they said, yes, I would vote for this person. So he is sort of on this really big mission to be able to say that, the technology companies are controlling our elections by controlling ephemeral content or the search engine curation that is given to swing state voters. Anyway, I thought that and I was like, wow, I'm not looking at it. My understanding of this phenomenon is not necessarily through a political lens, but through a spiritual one, and how information can be bombarded on an individual so that they can impact their belief systems. And I thought, man, is there a story like this in the Bible where we have an example and a model of how this happens? And I said, yes. And I found this story. If you go to Numbers 13:26, it says, and this story I think is well known, but they have been wandering the desert for a long time, many, many years. They go to the promised land right there. And Moses picks one person per tribe and says, you know what, let me get 12 individuals to go out into the land and then give a report back. And so they came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. And there they reported to them and to the whole assembly, showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. They should have stopped there. That's the most objective, this is what it was, and this is what we saw, right? But instead, they decide to curate the information. And they say, but the people who live there are powerful. And the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites live in the hill country. The Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. It continues on. But the men who had gone up with them said, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report. Why are they saying this information? Because ultimately they have a purpose. They don't want to go. And so they're coloring the information in such a way where they say the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we look the same to them. Now you might think, oh, they're just describing what they saw. But if you carefully compare that with what Caleb and Joshua says, it's completely different. You see, Caleb and Joshua, they don't see all those things and say, hey, we're not there to go there. They completely have a different type of reaction. But this bad report does something. The information that is curated to them for the purpose of discouraging them from going into the promised land has a very specific result. It says, that night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, if only we had died in Egypt or in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. The curated information impacted their belief systems. It told them, you're not good enough. You're not strong enough. You can't do it. The curated information discouraged them, put them in a place where they began to grumble. They became depressed, and eventually they began to rebel against God. This is what curated information does. Because it is so specific to our instinctual drives and engagement, it brings us to a place where we look at ourselves and we look at the informational content that is streaming into us, and we say, I'm not as beautiful as that. I'm not as big as that. I'm not as good as that. And therefore, it becomes a place where you start to feel bad. It starts to impact your psychology. It starts to redefine your belief system. It starts to cater into your anxiety, and it cater into your fear. And it starts to impact your decisions and your behaviors. The lesson one that I want to point out is curated information can impact your belief systems and determine your behavior. Now, you might think that, No, this doesn't happen to me. This doesn't occur. I know, I'm aware, you know. And I will give you a personal example later of how this impacted me. I will tell you how in a moment. But how do we combat? We'll give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. It's interesting that Caleb and Joshua, they saw the same things. They saw the same things, but the report was different. The report was different. They came in and said, hey, they might have seen the giants, and they said, you know what? God is going to help us come into this land. He's going to be with us to clear this land. The blessing that he is going to give us, they saw all the ways in which God is going to strengthen them to take this land. And that's how they saw it. They were seeing not with human eyes, but they were seeing with faith. See, faith is an interesting thing because faith doesn't require immediate you don't have to visualize it immediately in front of you. In fact, if you do see it in front of you, it's not faith, right? Faith is this idea, is a belief system that is, you're expecting something that has yet to happen. In my work at George Fox, I do a lot of training of animals. And usually I don't really, the students ask me, do you name your animals? Do you do all these things? And I do not name the animals because I do experiments with them. But, this time around, I decided to do something different. Usually I put them in an operant box. They learn how to press a lever, and they do some sort of, just operant-related tasks, and I do some manipulation in the brain or something like this. But anyway, this time around, I decide I'm going to do something different. Because I'm teaching a learning class, I'm going to teach the rats how to play soccer. And we're going to have rat soccer. And I was like, is this going to work? I'm not sure, but let me just... And I decide to take 5 female rats, and I chose females on purpose because, anyway, I chose females on purpose for other reasons, and I didn't know if it was going to work, but I gave them a better diet. I fed them like not just their rab chow. I would give them like grapes. Like they loved grapes. I put them in like a 3-tiered like rat mansion of enrichment because I feel like I need the like cognitive development, So when I put them in, and incidentally, like this was a big issue for me because these rats became very smart. And what happened was I had this cage with a latch, and about a week ago, I came in, there was supposed to be 5 rats in there, and I only noticed that there are 3 rats in there. And I was like, oh no, what happened to the other 2? And so then I look around, and they're just running around in the big room. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. So it took me about 45 minutes to coax these rats back into, and I put them back in the cage. Now, once a rat learns how to escape, they have already made that memory and they know how to escape, right? So I decide I'm gonna zip tie all the cage doors. So I zip tied every single cage door and thinking that it would be safe. The next day, they were gone again. The 2 rats were gone again, or actually 3 rats were gone, and they had chewed off all the zip ties. And I know now what they physically learn with their paws. They just open the gate. They know how to go put it in and open the gate. And anyways, when I'm doing this type of behavior, it's really important. By the way, these rats are very good at soccer now. They're really good. I should show a video. I should have showed a video, actually. That would have been, but they get very aggressive because they really love Reese's Pieces candies. And so I motivate them in that way. But so it's really important that when you're doing a sort of a behavior, that you don't condition them immediately You don't reward them immediately every time. And there's a reason for that. Because if you reward them immediately every single time, hello there. The moment that you don't do that, they start to decrease their behavior. So if you don't continuously, if they've learned to be continuously reinforced, they learn very quickly, but the moment that you don't do that, their behavior starts to decrease immediately, okay? And so what you do is you do what's called partial reinforcement. A partial reinforcement schedule is like every other, or they keep moving the ball over to the net, and then just like moving it over, they look at me, they're like, I want recess. And then I don't give it to them, so like, they start dagging the ball again, and they're looking to me again. I'm like, no, one more time. And they're doing it again, and then I give them a recess. And thereby I strengthen the behavior. Because they don't know when they're getting the reward. They just know that they will get it sometime. Now, if you study, when I look at Joshua of Nun and Caleb, and I ask myself, why were they able to look at the promised land differently? It's because they had experienced the struggle of going to God, not getting exactly what they want, but still continuing to persist in spite of non-reinforcement. And from that learning history, they begin to believe that because of God has done this in the past, He can do this for me in the future. You cannot in other words, you cannot go in front of the promised land and look at the giants and say, God is gonna give this to us. It is a promise to us unless you have gone through these trials in the past. There is no way that you can have faith to overcome giants if you have not had the faith of small things, little gestures. If you haven't gone through that, it's impossible. You'll just be like the other 10 spies, and you look at them and be like, this is impossible, right? I think of that, I think of this verse in 2 Corinthians 5, where it says, basically Paul says, the bodies that we live in are like tents, tents that you put up and you take down, right? Like we live and die so easily. So we're just like tents. We get them put up and we're clothed. But here's the thing. We believe, now it says, now the one who has fashioned us for this very purpose is God, who has given us the Spirit as a deposit, guaranteeing what is to come. I have been more and more impressed with the idea that we don't believe in God, or we don't believe in Jesus because there was this guy that lived and died 2,000 years ago. We don't believe just because, this happened historically, that's why we believe in Jesus. We believe in Jesus because He resurrected and He gave us something upon that resurrection. What is that? That is His Spirit. And when that Spirit is in you, that is supposed to do something. We become instruments of Him. We move away from our selfish heart. We begin to understand that when we receive the Spirit, we can become generous. We can become kind. We can do the things that against our instinctual drive and our programming. We can do those things that is impossible in our own nature to do. When that Spirit is with us, we have room, and we have room to be unselfish. We have room to override the programming that is in us. This is called living by faith and not by sight. When we live by faith, we ask Jesus, say, Jesus, I cannot do this. It's not in my capacity to be generous or to bite my tongue here or to be patient here. It's not in my nature. I want to fight for my right of self-preservation. I want to fight for what I perceive is unjust. We have this drive, right, when we have been wronged. Instead, we ask for this Spirit. We ask for the Spirit for humility. We ask for the Spirit for love. We ask for the Spirit for generosity of mind. And no more, where this is, seen and must be tested than in the relationships around you. The more I think about Christianity, the more I realize that it's less about proselytizing to strangers thousands of miles away and baptizing them. It's more about the people that God has put in your life on a daily basis. That is where Christianity is practiced. That is where Christianity is tried and tested. That is where the fire is. That is where things happen. Now, I'm going to tell you a deeply personal thing. The reason that I came across this story and this thing is so deeply personal to me is that I realized that the curated information that I was consuming was defining for me what a marriage is and was. What is it supposed to be? And that's kind of odd. What is that relation supposed to be like? I realized that, all this information that was being fed to me was curated information, and it was making me feel disappointed, despaired, and lonely, and unhappy. I was like, why am I feeling this? Why am I feeling these things? And I realized that it was because marriage was being defined to me in ways that was not biblical. So how is it defined? I decided, how is it defined? And I decided, let me just go to what, this is lesson 2. I'm already skipping around. Faith can resist the pressure of curated information. I'm going to go, next slide, please. Before we get there, I'm a little ahead of myself. In the Revelation, it says that blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. When I think about that comment, I understand that the relationship between you and Jesus is one of a marriage, right? That's what it said. It's the model of the relationship between you and Jesus is one of a marriage. That means that is the model that you should have between you and your spouse, right? And when I think about that, I'm like, wow, that's a different definition than the world gives. The relationship of marriage, the relationship that you have with Jesus is one of character formation and character development and change. It's about your salvation. When I thought about my marriage to my wife, I didn't think about that. I didn't think that this person is there for my own character development. This person is there for my own salvation. This person is there to try and that's what they're there for. And I was struck by this. It's a totally different analogy. It's not to receive and to be loved and do all these things. In the end, it's about your salvation. It's about your development as a person. I decided, where else? I need more information. I went to Adventist Home. Now, my parents, my mom in particular, gave me Adventist Home to me. Does everybody know what Adventist Home is? Like this thick compilation of all these quotes about marriage and dating and all this other stuff. My mom gave it to me. I started reading it and I'm like, Mom, this is not good. And I threw it out. I said, this is so boring and this is not relevant and this doesn't apply to me. I already chose my person. And then I don't think, and honestly, I don't think Adventist home is for newlywed people. I honestly don't think so. Because if you go to Adventist home, let me just go to chapter 16, because if you go to the next slide and you go to chapter 16, a happy, successful partnership, if you go to that, man, that cut deep. Let me just read some quotes from there. Let's go to the next slide here. It says this is the very first sentence: to gain a proper understanding of the marriage relation is the work of a lifetime. Those who marry enter a school from which they are never in this life to be graduated. That is not the analogy that I was looking forward to. She doesn't mince words here. And there's a lot of people here that are not married, and I understand that. And I want you to think about just the closest person next to you. Who has God put in you? But I am specifically talking about my experience and testimony here. She says that it's a school. It's a school that you don't graduate from. And I'm like, what do I do in school? Well, first I have to learn. I'm in a school setting all the time. You have to be curious. You have to develop, you have to continue to learn and to grow, right? And then she astutely says, however carefully and wisely marriage may have been entered into, few couples are completely united when the marriage ceremony is performed. She says, they don't have a clue. When you start marrying, you just don't understand, right? Only people who have been married like 5, 6, 7 years can understand this statement. The real union of the two in wedlock is the work of the after years. And then she goes on to say, and then she just, let me be absolutely clear. As life with its burden of perplexity and care meets the newly wedded pair, the romance with which imagination so often invests marriage disappears. And she doesn't mince words here. She's like, hey, scoot that on out. Unsustainable. The romance from the beginning disappears. She does not mince words here. She tells it like it is. And then she says, husband and wife learn each other's character as it was impossible to learn in their previous association. This is the most critical period in their experience. The happiness and usefulness of their whole future life depend upon taking a right course now. Often they discern in each other unsuspected weaknesses and defects, but the hearts that love has united will discern excellencies and also therefore heretofore unknown. And then she gives advice. Let all seek to discover the excellencies rather than the defects. She says, you know what? You've been living with this person for 6, 7, 8, 10, 20 years, and you know everything about them. You know that they sometimes pick their burgers or something. I don't know. You know sometimes they pass gas in certain ways. You know everything, every bad trait about them and how they eat with their mouth open and everything like that, okay? You know everything about them, right? But don't focus on those things. That's what she says. Don't attend to those things. She says, attend to the things that they're good at, the excellencies. The excellencies. Then it says, and this statement really got me, often it is our own attitude, the atmosphere that surrounds ourselves, which determines what will be revealed to us in another. How I interpret that saying is the atmosphere is, for me, it was curated information. What do you see? How is it defining you? How is all the information that you're seeing, the environment that you surround yourself in, creating a belief system that really gets you to be choosing to either look at the defects or look at the excellencies, right? When you look at Mr., Mrs. Perfect and Mr. Perfect, and then you look at your husband or wife, you're like, these are the ways you're not measuring up to Mr. and Mrs. Perfect, right? These are the ways in which, it's a terrible thing, how information, curated information can impact our own belief system that can result in our beliefs of what a relationship and a marriage is. Affection may be as clear as crystal and beauteous in its purity, yet it may be shallow because it has not been tested and tried. Make Christ first and last and best in everything. Isn't that interesting? We're not talking about like your own spiritual journey. The context is a relationship with your spouse. It said, make Christ first and last and best in everything. You know, constantly behold him, and your love for him will daily become deeper and stronger as it is submitted to the test of trial. What is the test of trial? It's a marriage relationship. So again, and it says, as your love for him increases, your love for each other will grow deeper and stronger. Again, this is not something that this was open to me. Your concept of a marriage and how you to behave. You know, when I think about habituation, we habituate to the romance. We habituate all to those things. But we don't understand that the model of marriage, as E.G. White points out, it's a school in which you learn, in which you grow spiritually. And they are there specifically for your benefit. They are there for you and your character development. And your Christian principles, this is where rubber meets the road, right? This is where this is really tested. Do you really believe in Jesus? Let's test it out in your relationships around you, because that's the hard facts. That's the evidence that it's going to give to you how much character formation happens in you. And let me tell you, it's not easy. It's not easy. You have to cling to Jesus like you're dying of a sickness, because you have this overwhelming desire to protect yourself. And if there is a slight on your character, you want to defend it. You can't understand another person this way. She gives some advice. She says, through difficulties, perplexities, and discouragements may arise. Let neither husband nor wife harbor the thought that their union is a mistake or a disappointment. Determined to be all that it is possible to be to each other. Continue the early attentions. In every way, encourage each other in fighting the battles of life. Study, again, that school metaphor, to advance the happiness of each other. Isn't that interesting? Study to advance the happiness of each other. Then marriage, instead of being the end of love, will be, as it were, the very beginning of love. I had to bring in Jamie last night and be like, is this okay for me to talk about? This is deeply personal. She said this is okay. In the past couple weeks, as this has been impressing on me, I have been more intentional about trying to incorporate these principles in our marriage. To do gestures of, this is basically, I'm going to go all the way to the end. Can we go all the way to the end there? And there's some recommendations that were given in this passage to be curious. Don't stop. Continue to ask questions and be curious about your partner, about your spouse, about this relationship that is in front of you. Continue to do gestures of kindness. Pay attention to details and be conscientious. Be careful with your words. Simple comments, simple recommendations that E.G. White gives. Now, I've been trying to incorporate those things. And you know what? As I began to incorporate those things, something very unique happened in the past week and a half and two. And what happened was I noticed something that I don't think I would have noticed, which is I noticed that my wife did something for me that was solely for me as a gesture of kindness. And it was something very small, but it meant something so much to me. I think that when you get into situations, we are blind to these things sometimes. We don't see those gestures of kindness and attention to detail. If you are filled and pay attention to these things, if you notice those things, all those feelings of love and care and kindness will come. And they came in a strong way, in a warm way, like I was covered with a warm blanket. And I was so grateful. And I said, this is the reason why I'm in this relationship. I care and I love this individual. Many times in life, there could be a disconnect between your spiritual life and your regular life. The Bible says they should be one. The people, again, around you are there because God put them there so that you can exercise, trial, and test your Christian principles in those relationships. And if you don't see that, if you don't see evidence of that, that is where you need to practice. That hard school is where you need to ask Jesus, fill me with your love, that I could have love to give. Fill me with your kindness that I can give kindness. Fill me with your conscientiousness. Fill me with your level of attention to be intentional in the way that I love. This is where change happens. This is where you grow. This is where you begin to become spiritually developed. You become a better husband, a better father, a better brother, a sister. All these things happen through this exchange of the Spirit that exists in you. It is a privilege to hold the Spirit of God in you. And it is your job to practice the dispensation of that Spirit in your everyday lives. Let's pray. Dear Lord, we thank you so much for this simple message. Again, you remind me and remind us that the relationships around us, the people that you have put in our lives, is the place in which we can exercise the Spirit that you give to us so freely. Lord, help us to receive this Spirit through faith. Give us a spirit of love, of generosity, and kindness. Lord, help us to practice this, Lord, that our characters and who we are may become more like you. I pray these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.